we talk a lot about the homeless industrial complex because it is a real thing. I used to be a denier, but I used to be a denier of a lot of stuff. And then I just woke up, red-pilled one day, just like that. The homeless industrial complex is undeniable to me because you have, I mean, look at hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that are spent, and we have a worse homeless crisis now than we've ever had. And that is telling you that what they're doing is not working. And the underlying political environment is creating a situation where we have more people entering homelessness on our streets than we are pulling out of homelessness. And that's because we've essentially de facto legalized drugs. We don't hold people accountable for crimes that they commit, perhaps to fund a drug habit, et cetera. And so it's this whole environment that is just sort of leading to this really sad, deadly situation on our streets. And then you can throw billions of dollars at it because you have elected officials who keep calling it a housing crisis when it's not. They don't even identify the problem properly, so of course it's never going to get fixed. So all that money is going into this giant government cog, bureaucracy and red tape. It's not going anywhere. At the same time, you have citizens who have become so fed up with that they are trying to take steps to make the problem better, to help their city, and they're doing it much more effectively and for far less money than the government ever has. And one of those entities, I've talked about them a lot on the show, is We Heart Seattle. So we had Andrea Suarez on the show last week just to talk about a voting initiative, but she also teased for us some data that was going to be coming out that is now out, and we'll dive into it. But they've announced that We Heart Seattle over the last 3 years, which is just a group of citizen volunteers, they go out, they clean up homeless encampments. While they're there, they connect with homeless people, try to understand their situation, connect them to services if they can. Again, a group of volunteers that operates based on donations. They have cleaned up now more than 1 million pounds of trash across the city of Seattle. Here's Andrea.
We know we've picked up 1 million pounds of trash. We know we've served almost every zip code in the city of Seattle. And when you look at the heat map, we're like, wow, it's really glaring how pervasive the issue is and how predominant it is in 2 particular voting districts. Queen Anne, we have done North and West Queen Anne Greenbelts, Kinnear Park. Hundreds of thousands of pounds have been there for over a decade.
Is that the one me and my subscribers came to?
Yep, yeah. Yep. That day we picked up 10,000 pounds. And in Soto and that in kind of lower industrial area in China, in International District, we probably picked up at that camp, 100,000 pounds alone. So, and we've been in the jungle and picked up in that greenbelt as well. So, yeah, it is obvious that there are 2 districts in particular where most of our trash was picked up.
And what's the point in you guys putting out those statistics?
I think it's just important to visualize how much trash we have picked up and where it is. And you have to ask, why is it there in the first place? Why are we not picking up the trash in our city? I mean, we were finding typewriters from the 80s and Coke bottles from the 90s and receipts and paperwork that was artifacts that had indicated that this trash had been there for years. And why, when you say, why hasn't the government, picked this up, what's going on? There's a policy of not allowing contractors to go on slopes. And there's the other very inhumane policy of not being able to go within 20 feet of tents. They don't want any contractors, nobody, unless you are that very specific and small outreach team. And to that I say, everybody needs to be an outreach worker. Everybody needs to be doing welfare checks on these tents. And anybody can really get out and pick up the garbage, as you saw in that transformational day in May. We all need to be hands on deck, and they is you. We all have to take a part in this crisis, including outreach.
Yeah, and I admire Andrea for that. I admire her saying, I'm not just going to sit back and complain and wish a government that has never stepped up to this crisis is eventually one day going to step up once all of our parks are buried under tons and tons of trash. I admire her for saying, I'm going to get up and I'm going to try to help. And she is doing an absolutely fantastic job. But that doesn't negate the failure of the government and the urgent need for us to recognize that and to stop the wasted funds that are going to the government to address this crisis. I mean, the depth of the trash that Andrea and her volunteers have picked up is a direct reflection of the depth of the failure of government. And I think what it really proves is that the government needs to get out of the way. If we really want to make sure that people in need are getting help, which I hope every single one of us does, I think the government needs to get out of the way. And I'm not saying the government doesn't have some sort of role in that process, but two things need to happen. The government bureaucracy and cog needs to account for less of the spending than the people who are actually out there doing the work. And these outside contractors, these nonprofits that the city partners with that our taxpayer funds go to, yes, they need to be watched like hawks. Of course, they still have to be accountable for their outcomes and for what they're doing, but we've had this government bureaucracy that not only has been burning through billions and billions of dollars, but sending billions of dollars to these outside entities to do work that they never properly account for. And so there's a lot that needs to happen. But when I look at what Andrea Suarez, a woman who woke up one day and decided she was sick of the trash in the homeless encampment at her local park, and has turned that frustration, that anger, that motivation, that love of city into 1 million pounds of trash picked up, work the government should have been doing. When I look at that, I see the power of private citizens versus the incompetence of the government. And it tells me a lot about what needs to happen in order for this homeless crisis to get better. If we keep feeding the homeless industrial complex, it will keep eating whatever we're willing to feed it until we decide it's okay to let it starve to death. Now, there's one other element of this data that We Heart Seattle put out about the 1 million pounds of trash. And I think it's important to understand where it's coming from, because the vast majority of their encampment cleanups over the past 3 years have been in 2 Seattle City Council districts. Does anyone want to guess which ones? Downtown Seattle, Andrew Lewis, and District 2, the International District, South Seattle. So in Andrew Lewis's, they've had 111 encampment-related cleanups. In Councilwoman Tammy Morales' district, 92. Think about that, 92 encampment-related cleanups. And then they also had a map that kind of pinpointed more directly where some of these actual cleanups are happening. And a lot of it, again, in South Seattle. The community, every council member is like, we care about that community. They have a higher population of people of color. Well, you're just allowing homeless camps to proliferate in that community. And then, of course, downtown, just north of downtown, etc. So to me, it is another illustration of the failure of those 2 council members in particular. Do you feel like, residents downtown, many of them, and many in South Seattle, and for sure in the International District, believe that their council members have failed them? Andrew Lewis, in the time you've been in office, 111, you've been in office now for just over 3 years, 111 encampment cleanups from We Heart Seattle alone, from a private citizen volunteer group in your district. How many of those encampment cleanups do you guess Andrew Lewis has been to? I don't know the answer. I'm gonna guess none. I'll ask Andrea. I'm gonna guess none. And for sure, I'm gonna guess none for Tammy Morales. So not only are these numbers an indictment of the homeless industrial complex, but they are also an indictment of council members who truly do not care about law-abiding citizens, about the quality of life in their districts, and they only care about policies that are going to make activists happy, the stop the sweep crowd.